Ladies and gentlemen, we're back with Season 1, Episode 8, The Great Expotations. We have a big science expo. Why is it the lady-in-waiting's job to set up the science expo? Why is Rapunzel not helping her with this task? Why is nobody helping her with this task? So anyways, Varian shows up again. Now, I'd be a little bit surprised by that. In fact, I'd actually be a lot surprised by that. If not for the fact that someone mentioned in chat that he's a recurring character earlier. So, because honestly, Varian didn't strike me as more than a one-off. So, I mean, most of the characters we've seen so far are actually one-offs. So it's like, yeah, okay. So, Varian's back. Woo, he's created a new element. Okay. It's this brand new element, okay? He takes sand and turns it into this little, like, see-through kind of a pseudo-metallic thing. He calls it glass. Cassandrium, excuse me. Sorry, I'm making fun. He sounds so old. I'm not even making fun. He's a good actor. But, like, God, Varian sounds so old. So I don't want to geek out about something that nobody cares about. But when he's setting up all of the guards and doing his thing, there's two things in that. First of all, we got a diorama of the kingdom, and I'm like, oh, okay. It's the first time we actually see a bit of a zoomed out perspective. So we see the kingdom, and we see the castle, excuse me, the main castle town. We see the bridge. We see like the greater area, and then we see the wall. We also know that there's stuff beyond the wall. But then we see something on the wall. No, not that wall. I mean, like, here, let me just show you. We see this. We see a map on the wall. It actually shows up twice. This is a better shot of it with less fuzziness. And this, let me tell you, I want to say, is either bad design or good. And I'm not actually sure which it is, because this is much larger than I thought it was, and actually completely different than the way they constructed it in most of the visuals where we see the kingdom outside of the castle town. Because you see there's the castle town there, it's on the left, obviously out in the ocean in the middle of France, like you do. And then there's a decent chunk of land, like a fairly large chunk of land with mountains and lakes and rivers and hills, and then the wall, which is way the hell out there and is gargantuan. And this got me thinking quite a bit, actually, because this would mean that the wall is indicative of the territory that they have claimed, not indicative of the inner layer of defenses. For those of you not aware, castles usually actually had multiple layers of walls leading to multiple types and layers of defenses. There's a whole thing that goes in. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole on that. All I'm trying to say is that I figured this was what's usually referred to as the wall right before the moat, even though I know they're on an island. In other words, the one that's right outside the kingdom. Or, if I could say this literally, if you're looking at the map here, right? Can I scooch over here? There we go. So I sort of assumed, you can't even really tell because I'm like right here. I sort of assumed that it would be like kingdom and then like wall, like right outside of the kingdom, relatively speaking. In other words, that it was specifically a defensive wall, but instead, as we can see, it's actually a territorial wall. That is the whole kingdom right there, which they certainly have a fairly large chunk of territory to them. I'm also not going to go too far down the rabbit hole on some of the geography here, some of which doesn't really make sense. Let's just not get into that right now. Point being, that redefines the nature of how things look and how things are designed. Okay, that's kind of cool. Cut to Cassandra, who hates her life, and Rapunzel, who isn't helping. The episode did get one laugh out of me. She's going through looking at some of the inventions, which we'll see during the actual expo later. And one of them is a guy who says, "Forget everything you know about spring-loaded stilts." And then she's like, "Done!" And then immediately leaves. You got me there, episode. I'll give you that one. We see a pancake flipper. We see the spring-loaded stilt I just mentioned. We see a way to make fresh goat milk. Also, I'm going to start counting off every time Shorty shows up as if it's funny. And it isn't. You know, the Neelix is a bad cook kind of a moment. Or the mascot moments, if you prefer. We're up to 3 with just this episode. So Dr. Alcott shows up, and he's an asshole. Is there an asshole quota? Is that what's going on here? I will give this to Varian. He's very invested in practical alchemy. Remember, his last big thing was he really wanted to provide warm water for a town. So that tracks perfectly. So the last episode Varian was in, he was bumbling and incompetent and didn't know what he was doing, and in fact had failed so many times, his father was able to recognize on the spot that this was another failure and react accordingly. Here, he's completely on top of things and only really makes one mistake the entire time. Did he level up substantially in the last few days, weeks? Or, like, did they actually forget that they wrote him to be like that? Do we want to have a counter for every time his ass up? No, I'll get back to that in just a second, though. Either way, he's cool for a minute. I'll give him that. Rapunzel then invents the hey-hey, powered by kinetic and potential energy, which is actually true. That is how a yo-yo operates. By the way, get it? Hey-hey, yo-yo. That's a bit brilliant, but then we get to my personal favorite invention of hers. The safety slicer. Shikung! What, don't you like it? A little bit early for the guillotine, I think. But, anyways. Also invented in France. Double humor. That got a kick out of me, too, I'll admit it. So... yeah, Pascal got it instantly. So Cassandra and Varian are there, and there's some bonding, and he's clearly crushing on her. I thought I'd be irritated at Varian crushing on Cassandra. Now, I'm not, because while it is crushing, for the most part, it is portrayed in a more friendly manner, and less than I want to get in your pants manner, which I'm actually in favor of, ignoring the fact that he's 14 and she's 22. The fact of the matter is, it just kind of fits a little bit better for the way that their characters are being portrayed. Yeah, it's not simping, it's just, hey, you're cool. And he's trying to impress her, which I understand that. That makes perfect sense, especially for someone who probably has as little self-esteem as he does. And I know what you're thinking. How do you know he has low self-esteem, Lore? Because he's 14. Your Honor, the defense rests. So, we also see that they both have a bit of a bonding point, both trying to live up to not particularly good fathers. What is it with this show and not having good fathers? Or absent fathers? So then they all slip on the floor. This scene is so, like, I'm torn on this scene. Because on the one hand, this is the third time I laughed in this episode. Oh no, what's going on? Hey, what's going on, guys? Why is this floor so smooth? But on the other hand, why is the floor being this smooth a problem for them? Like, they say it's wet, but I double-checked and I even froze it for a second. There's no water there. It's not like it's slick from soap. It's just a smooth floor. I've walked on smooth floors like that. They're not particularly smooth. They're not slippery. They look slippery because they're shiny, but they're not. They've got a gravelly texture to them. I'm sorry. I know this is being pedantic. But because I did actually laugh at the joke. But at the same time, I'm looking at this like... And yeah, maybe this is them showing that Varian's bungling again, but then he's actually super competent after this. I think they just wanted the gag. So anyways, she gets her shot. She can finally be a guard. All she has to do is abandon her friend. That's a great idea. So naturally, she abandons her friends. And this then leads... So Mr. Dr. Alcott shows up twice before this. But when he finally shows up, he has a line where he says, the greatest prize... If you win this, you will win the greatest prize in all of science, my approval. For those of you who don't, may the universe show mercy on your wretched souls. Let's talk about assholes. Because I said it jokingly earlier, but I mean this now with absolute sincerity. I think there actually is an asshole quota in this show. I think they need to have at least one asshole per episode. I think it's something that is a mandate. It's a part of the check marks. And who it is has varied. Remember, it was Eugene for like 4 or 5, episodes in a row. But then it shifted, and it was the king, and now it's this guy, and Eugene's fine again. And you sort of see how people are just kind of throwing the asshole ball around, and it's strange. And you're probably thinking, hold up. Why would there be an asshole ball? Like, why is there a quota for assholes? How many of you have played Spyro? Now, Mr. Ed probably has already figured out where I'm going with this, because I bugged him on Discord while I was looking into this. I even double-checked my own notes on the matter. Here's the deal. Assholes naturally lend themselves towards humor, because there's a lot of things you can do with an asshole and play with it. And yes, I realize this we're getting into, like, unintentional innuendo here, but just work with me for a second, okay? There's a lot of ways you can use it as part of a humorous thing. It is very, very common to make fun of people who are dicks. Is that better? In order to try and have it. You think it's a cheap way to have a comeuppance so we can feel good. It's a cheap way to create conflict so we can feel like, we want to beat them. You get it. There's a lot of ways that this can be used, so it feels like it's a great way to kind of introduce something with low effort, and that's true, but that's the problem. This is where we talk about Spyro and Moneybags. In Spyro 2, Moneybags was an asshole. End statement. He wasn't funny. He wasn't interesting. They didn't do anything with him. He was just a dick. Hi, give me money so I can teach you how to flap your wings. And then he makes fun of us for it. That's it. That's the joke. Now, I used a comparison during the Spyro 3 run, which I'm going to share here, because I actually think it's a really good comparison, and believe it or not, it stuck with me, because it really is a good way to explain this particular brand of humor. If you're going to do this kind of thing, you need to add something to it. Otherwise, the joke is, man, airline food sucks! And that's not much of a joke, is it? It's just stating the thing. Man, Dr. Alcott is an asshole, right? And that's it. There's nothing there. Nothing is added to this. Nothing is being used around. Yeah, Zephyr Breeze is another good example of this exact same concept. No, the way you make a joke like this work and use the exact same concept is you have the person sit down. They're in first class, and then the person brings out their lunch, and it's a twig, and it's a little, like, styrofoam cup with some water in it, and it's 2 peanuts. And the guy's like, oh, man, I'm sure glad I upgraded to first class. They're really doubling down on the food up here. And there you go. The same statement is being stated. Airline food sucks. But the presentation and the styling and the oomph added on top of it, you do something with it other than just making the statement. Make sense? And that's what I have against what this show has been doing so far. And one of the reasons I was so pissed at Eugene for long was because he was just an asshole. End statement. Nothing was done with it. Nothing was added to it. The episode just went out of its way to make him as unpleasant as possible. The end. Yeah, you'll notice Eugene is fine in this episode. Like, he's even a little bit stuck up, but to this extent where I don't want to, like, literally rip his head off, like I was in previous episodes. You know, oh, yeah, I like the wet look. That's it. That's it. Okay, I'm fine with that. Yeah, he's got the ego. He's always had the ego. That's in character. But, like, yeah, he got rid of the asshole ball. That's my point. I feel like there was legitimately a checklist somewhere where we had to have at least one unpleasant character per episode, because so far we've had one in every episode with the possible exception of Before Ever After. And yeah, I'm going to be paying attention to see if this continues, because we're already 8 episodes in, and all 8 episodes have had one. By the way, fun fact, think about TNG Season 1 for a second, and think about the concept I just mentioned. Anyways. Moving on. So speaking of this dude who is an asshole, he rejects the Swiss Army knife. He rejects the fan, which is horsepower. That's some good fat horsepower behind that fan. And then we see Varian. We see Varian's shtick where he invents Cassandrium. But of course he doesn't have any flair. Oh yeah, I saw little Pascal running alongside Max. I'm not sure he was adding much there. I don't know. And then Varian even has the line, what does flair have to do with? And he's like, whatever. And then we see the showman who literally bribes the judge with chocolate. And then she reveals her invention, which isn't. Like, it's quite literally nothing. It's just a bunch of cheap, gaudy stuff taped to some magnets. Or, I don't even know what, but it's not, yeah, it's an art display. She wins! And you see how this continues to not be funny. Now, if there was actually a story beat, a plot point about how this guy who is the big science advisor doesn't actually understand science, has never actually interacted with science before, and he was given the post because it was cousin of someone or something, or like I can think of like 5 things right off the top of my head that we could turn this into a character point and or a plot hook. But instead, no, he's an asshole. That's it. Yeah, honestly, that's exactly what I was expecting too, Lord Aramont. So, okay, that sucks. So the dude ends up creating the threat of the week out of absolutely nowhere by sheer virtue of his incompetence. Cool. It's okay, we have Horsepower Fan to counteract the thing that can destroy everything. Varian just created a doomsday device. For the 2nd time in a row. Now, I'm going to say something very unkind about this show. Please don't take this personally, Ross. But of the 9 episodes I've seen so far, I do not trust that this show is doing things on purpose. My writer factor is very low at the moment. Like I mentioned earlier with this wonderful, wonderful map, which is actually kind of an interesting map, but again, indicates a bit of a lack of forethought. Like they just didn't care enough to bother to put the attention to detail into it. So as of this exact moment in time, I have low writer factor. Why do I bring this up? Because if I had a high writer factor, this would be foreshadowing, almost guaranteed. This 14-year-old kid has invented 2 doomsday weapons in a row. Think about that for a second. Think about the implications there. Think about where they could take that. Think about both bumbling and then, like, maybe he gets kidnapped by the villain and the villain's like, ah, ha, ha, you will do this thing for me. And Varian's like, no! But then he finds out, no, he's been betrayed and he'll do it because Cassandra, and remember, Cassandra's the evil one, of course. So Cassandra's like, you will do this evil thing for me. And Varian's like, very well, I'll do it for you, Cassandra. Because that's what friends are for. And then he, like, helps Cassandra come back from being a villain. Like, there's all sorts of directions that I could be, debating about where this could go here. But instead, I don't think they're thinking about that. Except, I have to point out that right at the end, they go and they see the black spikes again. Now, first, I'm going to be honest with you, I sort of forgot the black spikes existed. In my defense, it's been to a very long and horrible 2 days, so give me a break. But I really did forget that the black spikes were in this series. Sorry. Oh, wow, Eugene's older than I thought. He does immediately put together that 2 and 2 about, the fact that Rapunzel is connected to the black spikes, which we'd sort of already kind of guessed since they literally follow her. We saw that in the first episode. And now he's part of the conspiracy, which means he's probably now a recurring character. Once again, if I had higher writer factor, I would say the fact that the king is specifically mandating that they can't actually, discuss this stuff would be deliberate. That the king actually knows what's going on and is specifically trying to stay down on it. As is, it just feels awkward. You'll notice I glossed over several scenes in the middle of this episode, and that's because they were just kind of awkward. I don't have a better word for it. Like, someone didn't really think about how the dialogue should flow, and so it doesn't. And so they just kind of go from emotional beat to emotional beat to emotional beat without really any strong connection or thing. It's just like, hey, we've got to have the this actually belongs to you moment. And then we've got to have the friends are here for each other and I've learned a lesson moment. And there's not really a lot of strong connective tissue between these. And so it's why I look at a lot of the scenes like the king saying, don't talk about the magic. And I just think, Having said all of that, did you know that not every show actually... Yeah, exactly, Ross. Not every show actually plans everything out in advance. In fact, even the shows that do some forward planning tend to not do that much forward planning. So, this is a good time as any to talk about front-loaded storytelling and back-loaded storytelling. Front-loaded storytelling is when you design the story up front. You get an outline, you get a concept, you get ideas, and this means you can lay down breadcrumbs, you can lay down bricks. And these can be help establish things and do foreshadowing, and in really good stuff, it can be Babylon 5 effect, right? So you laid everything out in advance so you could pay it off later, right? There's a power to that, but it's obviously a lot more work. And it's more fragile if something goes wrong, if you lose an actor, or like you lose a shift, or maybe like the show gets canceled or whatever, that can cause problems later down the line, right? Yeah, exactly, Lord Hermon. And I use Babylon 5 as the example because that was JMS's overall approach. That's how he writes most of his stuff. It's also how I tend to write, too. I say tend to because in more recent years, I've gotten a lot more... I've spent a lot more time studying the other side of things, which is backloaded storytelling. That's Deep Space Nine. Backloaded storytelling is we didn't plan everything all out in advance. Instead, we rolled with it. Now, backloading almost always involves some iffy stuff because you more or less cannot follow through on things, right? Because you didn't design anything to be followed through on. However, backloaded storytelling is still something that can be done very, very well, as Deep Space Nine shows. What you can do... Oh, excuse me. What you can do is you can look back at the stuff you started with and say, okay, what kind of implications are there? We didn't design any of those implications. We didn't do that on purpose. But what can we imply from what we already did? And that's exactly what Deep Space Nine did. Is they built a lot of things like... This is a small spoiler, but the very existence of the Dominion came out of one random line that was thrown out as just another one of the nearby powers in one of the episodes where Quark was trying to trade in the Gamma Quadrant. In hindsight, it's like, oh my god, that's the first foreshadowing, but at the time, none of that was intended. It was literally just something they threw out there. But then they looked back at that word and they were like, we should do something with that. That's backloaded storytelling right there. The reason I bring this up is there is another animated show that I'm very fond of that did a lot of backloaded storytelling. My Little Pony. Oh, don't mistake me. Eventually they did front-loaded. They kind of shifted over time to front-loaded. But Season 1 didn't plan out like anything. Except for the ball. That was like it. And Season 2 is another example of an example that they didn't really start planning out stuff. They just kind of did stuff. But later on, they would look back at the stuff they did and they would follow through on that. A huge number of later episodes would follow through on breadcrumbs that were left behind in the first 2 seasons unintentionally. And now you understand why I'm bringing this up with regards to this show. If this show follows the path that I am predicting, and it will eventually, get good, I feel like that's what's going to happen, is that they didn't really have a lot of this stuff planned out, but when they went back, they were like, because I was actually literally going to bring up Amending Fences. No spoilers, but Amending Fences takes a random name that was thrown into the background dialogue of the first episode and turns that into one of the best episodes of the show. That's backloaded storytelling, and you could see... Water. You could see why it's so popular, because it is by its very nature easier. Well, that's the wrong word. It's by its very nature more dynamic. Easier is the wrong word. It's possible to like roll with the punches better with backloaded storytelling. If you have issues, if you have problems, you can roll with that because it's okay. We'll just let that sit there and we'll never follow through on it, right? We don't have to go back to it because it was never planned to be anything to begin with. However, the other problem with backloaded storytelling is it's actually also much harder to do than front-loaded storytelling. I know that sounds strange, but it's because it's easy to do backloaded storytelling. Just say, hey! It's really hard to do it properly. To really take those original bits and make them make sense, that's tricky. And that's why I'm kind of like, about this. And yeah, so if this show does do backloaded storytelling, and I don't know yet, I'm kind of going on faith on that statement. We're not there yet. We're still clearly in the early stages. They may be laying some bricks on purpose. That's possible. They do keep referencing these black rocks. They obviously have some kind of idea where they're taking that. But it's also entirely possible that a lot of these elements are just going to be carried forward in the future, and then they'll actually start doing something with them because, again, we're in the beginning. And to continue the parallel, if you're just watching MLP Season 1, I wouldn't blame you if you aren't particularly impressed by it, because it's not that great. Especially for how much praise that show gets, including from me. Which means we have to rate this episode now. I'm gonna get the water. I'm gonna grab lunch, too. I might actually close my eyes for a bit, just to rest a little. I'm actually going to push against the crowd here a little bit, because I noticed no one agrees with me. I feel like this is actually a green. But hear me out for a sec. There's a few enjoyable moments. Like I said, the episode made me laugh 3 times, which is nothing insubstantial. But as I also mentioned earlier, a lot of the character beats and emotional beats just didn't work, and were kind of pushed against each other in ways that didn't cohese. And the whole episode hinges on an emotional core we barely spend time and attention on. Instead, a decent amount of the actual runtime is spent on Mr. Asshole, whose character trait is, and I already talked about this, he's an asshole. Like, even the threat of the week is caused because he was just off randomly messing with the device. We never even find out why. He's just randomly messing with the device. And so I feel like if this was a little bit more polished, I would go ahead and call this an easy yellow. As is, I think it's a high green. And that's going to be where I'm going to call that one. Like, it's not particularly bad. That's what blue is there for. But, not quite into it. So I'm going to take a little bit of a break. Like I said, I'm going to close my eyes for a bit. I'm going to get some water. And I am going to go and I'm going to try to get some food. Damn you, Lord Harabot! And then we're going to continue with Season 1, Episode 9, Under Wraps.